All right, so welcome everybody to this remote interview. My name is Lisette and I'm interviewing people and companies doing great things remotely. And today on the line, I have Barbara COVARRUBIAS Venegas. And Barbara, you are the founder and managing director of Virtual Space Hero, which helps people turn like passive attendees in their online events into active participants. That's what you have on your website. I just think that's really brilliant, like turning passive attendees into active participants. And you do that through event moderation, through live stream support, video support, facilitation, all kinds of things just to help people make their online events better. We're going to get into that. But you also have a PhD about careers and age. And so we're going to really talk about how hybrid and flexibility helps women in the workplace and helps organizations with it's gender inclusion. I wanted to say diversity inclusion, but gender inclusion. So we're going to dive into that. I'm really excited to talk to you today, but let's start with the first question, which is, what does your virtual office look like and what do you need to get your work done? And maybe this is a good time to introduce where you're from also, because that's also exciting.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks for having me. Well, I'm originally from Austria. I usually live in Spain with my family, but I'm currently today connecting from Argentina. And so I moved from the winter to the summer here and also to a different virtual office. And coming back to your question, how does my virtual office look like? So I think I'm very traditional or conventional to say so, because I do know that I need a proper office setup to get my work done. So if I look back to Valencia, what I have, we have an office space. So we have a room that is dedicated. It is our office. I have my specific table there. I have my humble desk or my humble works desk, my stand, which is a wooden desk that helps you to stand up while you're working and make it like in a move in a few seconds. So you don't have to move the whole table up or down. I have the same thing in Austria because very often we work from Austria. So I have the Harmony desk there, which is the German version, which is very similar. So I need that being able to stand up and sit down while I'm working. I have their space for my coffee cup, for my mug, for my coffee, which is very essential for my work, even though it's a decaf because I'm still nursing and decaf still there is a nice effect.
Still tastes great. Yeah.
And what do I need to get my work done? What I do like is I structure my work day or my work hours because I'm not working full days. I structure my hours beforehand. I structure the week in the first moment. Then I structure the hours before I start working. And I have clear priorities on what do I need to get done. So I have a 1-year-old and therefore, of course, I need to be very conscious about the time that I have and how I get or what things do I get done, how to say so.
So how does that look like for you? So like you plan your week in the beginning of the week in terms of how you're going to spend your time and what your priorities are. You do that like, just walk us through a little bit about your productivity process.
Exactly. So what I usually do is I have at the end of the week on Friday, I have a look at my next week and I plan through my calendar. So I use my calendar as an activity planning tool. And I have my live sessions there. I have a lot of trainings, I have a lot of coachings, but I also plan the spaces in between for activities or projects that I need to work on. Of course, I also have in my calendar planned, for example, my break time, my lunch time, my walking time, or whatsoever I need to do to be productive, like my relax time, my time to be productive or to become again productive, to recharge batteries. And if I look at my calendar, I also use a color system so that I immediately know when I look at my calendar, what is an active live session where I'm training clients or where I'm coaching clients, and what is a session where I'm only working on different tasks. I always have slots throughout the week reserved for my Calendly appointments because I have a Calendly link set up and clients or potential clients can book through my webpage appointments with me, 20 minutes consultations, free consultations to get in touch with me. And I have them blocked throughout the weeks.
Wow, sounds very organized. I love it. I have a very similar system. But yeah, I mean, when you're running your own business, that is the consequence, right? It's better to be focused and deliberate about our time rather than throwing spaghetti at the wall, which is what I've learned from my business coach. Do you find that it is difficult to switch between your offices when you're traveling between Austria or Spain or Argentina, as it might be? Does it take you a bit of time to get things set up, or do you have a system in place for that now?
For me personally, it's super easy to become productive and start working again wherever I am. So I don't really have a problem with that. The only thing is, I do know, for example, how my office in Austria looks like because I have my Harmony desk there. I know my internet. I know the stability that I have there. I personally, for example, this time we are in a new space, in a new place here in Argentina. And honestly, I really was a little bit anxious and nervous about connectivity, about stability of Wi-Fi, internet. I didn't have a proper room here yet the previous week, so I needed to change and play around a little bit with moving desks and tables. I don't have a co-working here nearby where I could go to. And it's also a little bit a matter of how do I organize myself with my baby boy, because in Spain, I do have my babysitters that come to my house. And so it's very easy for me to I just moved from the living room to my office and the babysitters are supporting me being in the living room or going for a walk. Here now, I have to be more conscious about time and how do I use my time, of course, also to be with the family, because that's the idea and the beauty of remote work, right? I can be wherever I
Yeah.
want to be, but I want to be also with the family or the friends that I'm in the place that I'm currently am.
Coincidentally, I interviewed another woman in Argentina years ago, and she had the same thing. She said, we don't want to forget why we went remote to begin with and to be able to take advantage of all the perks that it offers us. So yeah, you can work all the time, but yeah, why if you don't need to? And in fact, my team just went through this process where we had Monday morning meetings and all of us were kind of not looking forward to it. We could tell. And one of us said, like, man, remote work is supposed to give us pleasure. So why don't we redesign these Mondays so that we get more pleasure out of our work? And so we went through this whole process. We moved the meetings to Tuesdays, solved everything. Like it was just, yeah, it just didn't give us pleasure. So it was a great to like, oh yeah, let's remember why we do this to begin with.
Small action, huge impact, right? Fantastic. I love it.
Totally. Totally. Every Monday is different now, and we all rejoice that the meetings are not the end every week so far. Why did you go remote to begin with?
I've been a researcher for the past 10 years, and my area of research, the focus that I set for my research was about new ways of working. So all the things that we call now hybrid work is what we defined in the area and the research group that I was involved with. We defined it and we called it new ways of working. New ways of working, the possibility to look at the three pillars, people, place, technology, just from a different angle that we do in hierarchical or bureaucratic or traditional organizations. People in the middle, a very people-centric organization, a non-hierarchical system, possibility of flexibility, autonomy in terms of where we work and when we work. And so being a researcher and looking at new ways of working, of course, for me, it was also important to walk the talk or live the talk or live my research. And I was involved in several researcher groups where we connected remotely. I was also a leader for an NGO as a communication head and as a PR person for CERTAR, where we work as a global remote team. And for me, it was always interesting to see how my research connects with what I'm experimenting or experiencing in practice. And in 2019, that was like the 1 year in my career. I finished my PhD in 2018. In 2019, my university let me go. They let me go to become a visiting professor for 5 months in Valencia, Spain. And I was there with all the freedom, autonomy, flexibility that I wanted to have. I enjoyed it so much to be 100% independent, because although as a researcher, you always get a lot of freedom and flexibility, much more than a normal organization. My university, I could work 2 days remotely, so they wouldn't give me 100% remote possibilities. And when I was in Spain, of course, well, there was zero control. And I was like, I felt this energy of being able to do what I want to do, when I want to do it, and where I want to do it, whether I go to university, work from home, in a coffee store, even though, well, as I said, I'm very traditional. So I did go to coffee stores, but not that often, because looking down to the computer, it's just not as comfortable. And that is also when I took the decision, I need to change. I need to change something in my life because I want to be 100% remote. And 2019 is when I took the decision to leave academia as a full-time professor. And I started with my own business, Virtual Space Hero, where we work with global virtual teams and organizations and support them in their process of digital transformation.
Okay, so it's not just helping them set up online events, it's also helping them go through this digital transformation, and assuming you're helping now people transition into the new ways of working, given that you've got the whole research background behind that. Amazing, amazing.
Exactly.
So let's talk about women in the workforce and gender inclusion. Why is flexible working and hybrid such a game changer for women these days?
What I did find out in 2018 when I finished my PhD, and one of the sad, although important conclusions, was that one of the aspects why women have sort of this glass ceiling in their careers is because they are not getting enough flexibility when they become, when they move into a parenting role. And that was one of the striking conclusions. That is not as striking because I'm not the first one to discover that, but it was striking and sad because it was 2019 when I again discovered that in the Austrian banking industry. And it became very, very clear through all the interviews that I was doing on managerial or non-managerial level that women need flexibility, particularly when they come into a parenting role. On the other hand, what we also see is that age plays a particular role. Age in the sense of that we have age stereotypes which say that at the age of 35, if you haven't had your big career move, you won't get it anymore. So that's another dimension there. Yes. And that is in an industry. So imagine the banking industry is an industry that is rather old-centric or old-centered. And still in the banking industry, we have a very young-centric mindset of when we should have our big career move. And so particularly for women, flexibility, autonomy, and working also from home is very important. What we saw then in the pandemic is that, of course, particularly women who found themselves in a rather traditional relationship based on a male breadwinner model, which is like the traditional, the man is going to work, the man is earning more money, the man is bringing the money in. And those women were disadvantaged because many of them were then back home in a pandemic situation, and they had to take care of the work, of the homeschooling, of the household, and so on and so forth. So this is also when we had a very it wasn't a good discussion we were having on how remote work is disadvantaging women, because clearly during the pandemic, we were in a pandemic. It's not a work from anywhere or work from home situation that it should be. But we do know from research that if women are granted more flexibility and more autonomy about the way how they organize their work in terms of geographical and also time-wise decisions, they can stay easier on track of their careers than if they were not. I personally have also seen a second dimension during the pandemic, and there were a lot of discussions in the organization that I work with, that it was the first time that also men experienced what it means to not be on site, because we do know that whole distance or closeness bias that we have when we work, and women being often part-time workers or mothers being often part-time workers, we do see that they're also disadvantaged because of the closeness bias, distance bias, right? And men experience that for the first time. And this is where I saw a lot of very, very intriguing conversations in the organizations I work with, where sort of an eye-opener happens.
Interesting. So what I like about what you've said is we start to talk about that we are experts of our own productivity, right? Of like how we need to structure our day, and organizations trying to control that is kind of a losing battle. And then I would say it sounds like especially for parents or people who need to structure their day in certain ways. So So when you say that flexibility and hybrid is the game changer, is it only because it gives us so much flexibility and that there's permission from the organization to take it?
I think it is a game changer, not only for gender inclusion, but in general diversity, because all of us are different the way when we are productive or where we can work productively from. So I think it's beyond the gender aspect that I was just talking about. It is a game changer in general for the whole workforce, because the idea is, yes, that we work when we are most productive, that we work where we are most productive. And that can be today at my home, it can be tomorrow in the office, it can be the day after in a co-working library or whatsoever. So I do believe it is a game changer. And it is also a game changer because it provides us with much more possibilities to combine work and private life. Me personally, just looking at myself, I'm running my own company. I'm having a 1-year-old baby boy, and in Austria, I have the enormous freedom and possibility to stay home for a year. Even as a self-employed person, I can stay home for a year with my baby boy. But of course, we all do know how businesses run. You cannot just switch off for a year. And with the possibility to work from home, having the babysitters, and the way I could rearrange my day, I was just there for both parts. And I was there for my business, and I was there for my baby boy all the time. And of course, baby boy is always priority. That's what my clients also knew from the very first moment on. So when I needed to interrupt the session was interrupted. The coaching was interrupted. The keynote was even interrupted if I needed to for a few minutes. And that is amazing.
Totally. And it's so real. I mean, it's also what I've experienced in all of my online workshops. There's always somebody there where the kid is coming in or the pets are coming. I mean, the pets as heads have sort of always been there, but the kids are interrupting because, well, yeah, we were in a pandemic, and this is the real life situation for those of us that are still not able to go back to the office or get an appropriate place where we're not interrupted by kids. And maybe that's just not possible, but I do love that it opens up the possibilities for people to have that work-life fusion. And I think that's one of the big things you hear from everybody these days is just the gratitude for being able to spend time with our families. And maybe during the pandemic, it could have been a little too much, right? Like 24/7 is also not the right answer. But it's way better. Like it's way nicer to walk your kids to work than to fight the commute on your way to an office. So that would be great. So what are some of the best practices for hybrid teams that you're teaching people these days in this hybrid work environment? Because it is an extraordinarily difficult way of working, right? So where do you see where are people making the biggest mistakes?
I think the biggest challenge is really for most of the managers or team members that I'm working with or teams that I'm working with is all about becoming a remote first mindset, because people don't understand why we need to first think about our remote workers very often. And that's of course the problem or the challenge with unconscious bias. Distance bias is an unconscious bias, so we're not aware about how we are favoring people who are coming to the office. And I mainly work with hybrid organizations. I work like with, I don't know, 10% or maybe 15% of my clients are really 100% remote. All the others have a company, a headquarter, a building somewhere, and people are allowed to work from home. Most of the times only for 2-3 days or whatsoever, but even then it has a huge impact. So when I work with teams or with managers in whatever setting it is, I think thinking about what a remote first mindset means talking through meetings, decision making, communication, information sharing, data storage. That is like the starting point for everything. And very often I do see like eye-opening moments when they're like, oh, well, I've never thought about that. And just recently, I talked to a very traditional client of mine. It is an Austrian public energy company. And one of the managers told me in that session, well, he doesn't really understand why we need to think more about the remote workers, because listen to that. He told me, you think sometimes I have the feeling that those remote workers, they call in the people who are in the office and they make them run around like puppets because they cannot get access to some documents. And so my poor on-site workers, they need to run around and provide them with things that they should take care of themselves by themselves. And I was like, but don't you think that the problem there is exactly a different one, that people working from home, they don't have access to the things that are on site. And it was also like a long discussion, because he just thought that it is not fair that those coming from working from home need to call in the others making around them like puppets to get their things done. And that was interesting, because that's when the whole discussion started about how accessible and barrier free are my documents, my folders, my working material.
I love that. That is a brilliant example of somebody who, it's an innocent mindset shift, right? I'm sure he means well, but the mindset shift is increasingly important, right? So it's not that the in-person people are inconvenienced, it's that your information is not accessible in a way that makes hybrid working convenient for your
Possible.
company. Yeah. So you have the wrong assembly line set up for your workflow there. I love it. So I love this. So that's the remote first mindset, and it's making sure that your information is accessible, that people know where things are kept, that your communication lines are outlined, like how are you going to communicate with each other? How do you know what each other are doing? And just making sure that that is documented. I want to switch over, and just because I'm noticing that the time is starting to go by and I've got all these kind of questions, we might circle back to this, but I want to switch over to talking about great online events, because this is something that you are helping people with, and that is just taking events that you may have had in person and bringing them online, or is it that you're helping people with the online events that already exist?
Usually the organizations I work with, some of them, of course, by now it's 2022, they already had online events within their organizations. Sometimes there are meetings where they gather all the employees to discuss and communicate new directions, new changes, or stuff like that. Sometimes it is virtual team buildings or team building events or meetings that they are doing, and they need to change a little bit because they see that they are not that successful. And what we are doing is, I have a team of freelance experts from across the globe. We work in several languages. We have moderators, streaming experts, photographers, videographers, post-production after the event, because we also sometimes organize conferences, like bigger events that are over several days. We have musicians, a DJ, and so different people who make an event successful, who join me on a project base. And what we do is we go through with the organization on a design basis. We discuss with them what design elements should we consider to make an online event successful, whether it is an hour or it is 3-4 hours. And then we can, or if the organization wishes so, we support them with the people also setting that up. Sometimes, of course, I also do train the internal HR communications department how to set up or how to design the events. Very often they are WebEx based or Zoom based or Adobe Connect events. Sometimes we move beyond and we use platforms such as Hopin, Airmeet, Run the World, or Kumu Space. Depending on the size of the event, Kumu Space, Wonder, or other tools like that.
Oh, I love it. So what do you think is the biggest mistake that people make when they are organizing an online event?
I do think that the biggest mistake happens usually in the first 5 minutes, where we start with a typical introduction, introducing maybe the speaker or whatsoever, but not having the participants interact. So I always start with an interaction, whether it is through hand signs, whether it is through the chat, whether it is through a poll, sometimes something that activates the participants so that they are not just listeners, but they get engaged. And it can be a very small interaction just by showing where they are connecting from. There is something that I think, Lisette, I learned from you, that you were asking us to connect in a meeting and tell us where your foot is standing, right? So where are you connecting from and where your foot is on, like what material, whether it's a parquet or whether it's another sort of ground floor, right? And all these things help us to connect differently and make passive attendees to become active participants.
Oh, I love it. So always start with an activity that involves the participants. Do the housekeeping later. people will, that's not what you want to hear when you first log in. You want to like tell your story and talk or say something about yourself. Oh, I love it. All right. So in terms of great virtual events, let's talk about meetings then really quick, because that is also a virtual event. And I would ask for, in terms of hybrid meetings, I'm going back to hybrid now. I'm sort of connecting the events and the hybrid as I was training my train of thought. If we're going to go into hybrid meetings, what tips do you have for people in terms of hybrid meetings? Besides, don't have them, go remote.
Yeah, exactly. I think the first thing that I do with my clients, I do check on technology. And if the basic technology, like having a 360-degree camera, having everybody in a good meeting room or joining via a good online platform, if that is not working, I definitely don't even go there to talk about hybrid meetings. So what we do is, with many of my clients are using the Meeting Owl, which is like a very convenient €1,000 thing that you can start investing in. And many of my clients are using or Microsoft Teams or Zoom as the online version. When we talk then about how to facilitate or how to design, to start first and facilitate hybrid meetings, I have a lot of courses or trainings that really focus on what does it mean to consider and include your remote participants. What do you need to consider from a moderation point of view? So who is taking care of the virtual participant while you are as a main moderator, for example, in the office? Who is taking care if they want to say something, if they want to contribute something, and you might miss that. So I always go through the setup in terms of having a moderator in the room, having a moderator in the virtual space, maybe even thinking about a buddy system which connects the in-presence on-site participants with a virtual participant, and also thinking about what do you do? How do you mix up, if you want to mix up the virtual participants and the on-site participants, if you go into breakouts, for example? How do you do that? Do you have enough computers on-site so that each on-site team, to say so, can have at least 1 or 2 computers and literally take with them the virtual participants and include them also during the breakouts? I do know that some of the event professionals that I follow or work with, they in big events or in big virtual events, they tend to suggest not to mix up the input, like in conferences, to say so. If we talk about 400, 500 people conferences, event professionals tend to not mix up the on-site and the virtual attendees, just because it's too much of a hassle. But if we talk about a meeting and it's a team meeting, I tend to, if the technology is there and if we have enough time to prepare it, to mix them up and suggest to mix them up as well.
I love it. So one, make sure your technology works, because if your technology isn't good enough, you're going to be doomed no matter how good your facilitation techniques are. And then next is make sure that the remote participants are included either through facilitation or through a buddy. Yeah. And then I would also say, it sounds like what you're also saying is design for the hybrid environment. So just really have a plan for your breakout rooms, have a plan for, like, if you're going to use a whiteboard, how are the remote participants going to access that whiteboard? You know, these kind of things. So just have a plan for how you're going to do that. So I've got a few more questions left, but we're running out of time. But I want to ask you about virtual team building, because that sounds like something that you've also helped clients with. Now, since the pandemic, a lot of people have been doing, like, you know, the pizza parties and the game nights and things like that. But have you also noticed, I mean, from my feeling is the last thing that I want to do on a Friday night after a long week of too many online meetings, right, is go to another virtual pizza party. What are some good online team building events that you've seen or that you've helped organize that really did bring out the spirit of the team? What can you recommend for people?
I also personally think that we should not overdo it with virtual pizza parties or virtual karaoke nights or virtual trivia games or virtual escape rooms and all those things. I think for a good, in-depth, honest connection with your team, very often it's just enough if you give your employees, your team, the possibility to connect on a weekly basis for 20 minutes on a Wednesday morning to have a coffee, or at a lunchtime to have those 20 minutes where you intentionally start conversations, to share personal stories, because at the end it's about the personal part that often is lacking, the personal stories that sometimes is missing when we are working online. Why? Because we're super task oriented in the virtual space. Often we jump into meetings, we don't have that random check-in that is happening in a normal meeting, right? Because we come to the meeting, we start chatting about our weekend or about the week or the weekend ahead or whatsoever. But in an online meeting, it's just more difficult. That's why we start with the first agenda point, that it is not, as it should be, the check-in, but it's rather a topic to be discussed. So I have the feeling that if we talk about, if I look at the teams that I work with that are really successful, it is those managers who provide space to their team members to connect for those 20 minutes, and it shouldn't be too long. And very often, what we also need to have is an asynchronous communication tool, whether it is a WhatsApp group or it is a channel on Slack, Microsoft Teams channel, whatsoever, where you also provide the possibility to, for example, share some personal stories, some picture of where I'm currently working from, or the dish that I'm cooking today, or whatsoever. So this is also the possibility on how to build the team spirit in an asynchronous way. What we do in our events, very often we really have random breakout groups, and based on the event or the topic that we're currently discussing, we provide them with fun or intriguing questions that are connected with the topic, and we mix them up into breakout rooms, and then we repeat for like 3-4 times at the end of one of the events that we had with the organization, for example.
I love it. So really the best thing that a leader can do is not necessarily organizing the virtual pizza parties, but rather organizing a time, creating space for these conversations to happen. And I would say bonus points to the leaders who send out the cinnamon rolls and the cinnamon buns or the pizzas in advance, right? So that so that you actually get something in the mail and then have it together on a Wednesday. That's a special thing, because I think people forget, but you can send a pizza almost anywhere in the world. Right? It's pretty easy now with the technology, especially since the pandemic. You can do almost everything online. So yeah, send a cinnamon bun through the mail. It's a lovely surprise for your employees. Okay, we're reaching the end of our time. I've just got 2 more questions for you, and the last one's super easy. But this one is favorite tool or book or podcast that you're really into right now.
Lisa, I need to be very honest. It's definitely yours, because I'm learning a lot through your podcast. So Collaboration Superpowers is on top of the list.
That's so nice. Bonus points.
No, absolutely. This is one of the big favorite podcasts. I do like a lot the HBR idea casts. And I listen a lot to the TED podcast. They are very short. So I'm usually looking for shorter podcasts, not those Joe Rogan 3-hour style interviews, because I just don't manage to get to the end of that. So it's like really, I look for a shorter podcast, Collaboration Superpowers, HBR Ideacast, or TED podcast. And book, I'm currently reading Transcend. So it's all about Maslow and the hierarchy of needs and how we can live a better life. So this is now the book on my table here in Argentina.
Ooh, I love it. Sounds great. All right, we'll put it in the show notes. And the last question is, if people want to learn more about you, what's the best place to go to connect with you?
The best place definitely is on linkedin.com/BarbaraCV. So you find me there. My webpage is also barbaracv.com. That's my personal one, or virtualspacehero.com. I'd love to connect with you and hear from you as well.
Great. We'll put all of those links in the show notes to make it easy for our listeners to connect. Barbara, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and your knowledge today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Thanks a lot for having me.
All right, everybody. Until next time, be powerful.